Being a young adult today is unique compared to other generations. People in their 20s and 30s and beyond are struggling with life transitions and fitting in and finding the career and the family and the relationships that are really meaningful to them.
What you're posing is more of a business mindset and really truly taking that entrepreneurial leap.
You know, AI is a big thing that we think about because it's happening everywhere, but that we're also just curious, like, what are business owners and leaders kind of C-suite positions thinking about right now? Because the world is just ever changing.
Downsides of like solo entrepreneurship is that if you're not working, you're not eating. There's no kind of safety net. There's nothing passive about it.
I think it's poetic how it's come full circle. I mean, my whole wanting to start this podcast is I think business owners are in their head too much and they need to get into the real world. Awesome. Well, Lindsay, thanks for joining me today. Hopefully Wendy will be able to join here shortly. You are our pilot version of the podcast, so very much looking forward to the conversation today. And, you know, as we talked about in the pre-show, you know, really what we're looking to do is kind of illuminate the stories of owners as they go through their journey in business. And so what we're looking for today is kind of three topics to cover, which is what's your origin story in getting into business? What are the key relationships that played into you kind of going from one spot to the next? So kind of accelerating in business. And then at the end of the day, what's kind of on your mind lately? So obviously we want this to be very conversational. Wendy's here as well to kind of spur a conversation as we have it. But would love to just know from your perspective, you know, you've been in business for a handful of years now. What's kind of your origin story?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be the first guest on the pod. My origin story. So I'm a social worker by education. I have a master's in social work. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and the whole business, kind of the very root origins are I moved from New York back to DC in 2018. And frankly, I just didn't know what to do here. I didn't have a network. I was working remotely, a professional network. I was working remotely in a job that was very toxic and unsustainable. So, kind of as a stopgap, as I left that job and as I was figuring out what I would do next, I decided to start seeing a couple clients of my own, see if I could just, again, bridge the gap. I had done all agency and nonprofit work when I was in New York and really did not have much interest in private practice or being a therapist in that regard. As my long-term career. And so in the meantime, as I was trying to kind of establish connections and build a network and figure out where I could go next when this remote job fell through, I kind of made myself a website. I, said who would want to see me as a therapist. And I said probably teenagers and young adults. I certainly kind of in that age group. I look young, I feel young. And so I made a website, I made a Psychology Today, and I started seeing clients, and I was very surprised by two things after I started that. One is that my schedule filled up extremely quickly. And there seemed to really be a group of young adults that were looking for me as a therapist. I had kind of been raised in the social work world of, the good therapists are very seasoned and kind of older and wiser. And that's kind of the end goal. And I found that in this generation that millennials and Gen Z were often looking for a therapist that was a peer and that they could relate to and that they had shared experiences with and that they didn't it's a unique, being a young adult today is unique compared to other generations. And a lot of clients were just feeling misunderstood by other therapists that they worked with, or that they had to kind of explain like current cultural phenomenons like dating apps, social media. And it was very refreshing to them to have a more like peer-to-peer therapeutic relationship. So I kind of accidentally stumbled into a niche that way. And then the second very surprising thing to me was that I really enjoyed it and found it very fulfilling. And, kind of it being able to intervene with young adults at that stage of life, like kind of in between adolescence and kind of full-blown adults, which I realized was not just early 20s, that people in their 20s and 30s and beyond are struggling with life transitions and fitting in and finding, the career and the family and the relationships that are really meaningful to them. And we're in DC. It's a very fast-paced, hustle culture, high ambition, eat or be eaten type of environment. So, and I was also born and raised here, so I could relate to all of that. So that was kind of how I decided to kind of make my own private practice very permanent. And I kind of fell into business that way. I am someone kind of, which is not totally typical of therapists and certainly not what we learn in school. Like, I have a very analytical brain as well, and I love numbers and data. My high school guidance counselor wanted me to go into engineering because at the time, being a woman in engineering was very coveted and rare. I decided not to go that path, but I have a skill set and interest that while I knew nothing about business, my father forced me to do accounting 101 when I was in college, and that was the extent of that's the only time I stepped foot in the business school. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So that was my private practice, and then COVID hit, very, of course, isolating. Being a human was very isolating. Being a therapist was really isolating. Needless to say, I was a little bit bored at home and thought it would be, a good idea to open a group and start hiring a team for one to service the tons of young adults that were struggling with mental health in DC and looking for support during that crazy year of 2020, and for myself to kind of build a more of a community for therapists in a home that they could also feel like valued and taken care of and supported, which can be very rare in social services in general. So that is how the Sterling Group started in 2021.
Awesome. And Wendy, welcome. I know we had some tech issues, so I'm glad you're able to get those figured out.
Sorry.
It's okay. So Lindsay, I guess two things kind of come to mind for me. One is, you went from, and you and I know the scorecard, right? It's 25 sessions, but really you probably need to see 27 to 30 clients to actually, fill up your individual contributor caseload. Can you kind of talk about that transition a little bit and like what made you take the leap of faith from, hey, I'm going to run my own practice as me, the solopreneur, to Lindsay, the hiring several clinicians? I'd love to kind of know what was in your mind at that time and when you kind of took that leap of faith.
Yeah, I think a big one, and again, how I kind of started realizing that this could be my career, is that I had a lot of demand. I always had a wait list. I was always full of my own capacity. In my personal life, I was getting married. I was thinking about starting a family. And, the downsides of like solo entrepreneurship is that if you're not working, you're not eating. And, there's no kind of safety net. There's nothing passive about it. And so I think those two things, which with, again, kind of the boredom and maybe some of the delusion that was happening, being stuck in my house in 2020, I, I figured that if I kind of established a group and started to hire, that I probably would be able to fill those caseloads and, have the demand there. And I did. We were able to grow pretty quickly. In the first year, I think I started maternity leave exactly 1 year after opening the business. And by the time I went on maternity leave, we had 5 therapists besides myself. So, we were able to pretty quickly find clients, find awesome therapists, build a team, get them filled up. And yeah, I think that, we grew a little big for our britches. So we kind of grew really fast and then had to dial back a little bit of okay, well, we haven't set the foundation as strongly as I would like to have a sustainable practice that also isn't solely reliant on my brain and myself to keep everything standing. So after that, we kind of, in terms of growth, we slowed down a little bit and have, the last couple of years still been hiring and growing, but also really focusing on a solid foundation and systems and all of that.
Yeah.
So, Lindsay, can I ask, do you continue to practice and see patients, or do you focus on running the business?
I focus 95% on running the business. I have a handful of clients right now that I've seen that I pre the Sterling Group. So they've been my clients since I was a solo practitioner. And so I still see them. I haven't taken a new client since the Sterling Group was opened. So it's a good balance. I enjoy, a little bit of the clinical work with these relationships that I have established, and but focusing primarily on the business side.
Was there anything that was feeling risky about that to you, or what was kind of going on in your thought process and making that transition? Because certainly in any type of practitioner world that we see in professional services or any kind of medical, or certainly in therapeutics, often it is based on a practitioner or a group of practitioners, perhaps sharing office, back office systems, but they try to go in together and they still have a practitioner mindset. Mm-hmm. What you're posing is more of a business mindset and really truly taking that entrepreneurial leap. So what was that like for you from going from one to another?
Yeah, it's definitely a risk. I think, again, going on maternity leave twice now, but the first time really, I was able to, my caseload was reduced that way kind of naturally, and with finding other fits for some of my clients. And then just, my life as a business owner, as a new mom, it worked out well in that regard to have a slightly, reduced client facing hours that, allowed me more flexibility. I think, in terms of really taking that leap, and the risk of it, I tend to be more on the side of being open to risk. I also, I had to kind of trust the process, that as scary as it was to maybe let go of some of the steady income that I was getting from my clients that didn't need to then be, paid to anyone else. It was just kind of straight revenue. Is that I knew that my time was more valuable in the business, and that I would not be able to be good at either role if I was, doing 20 client-facing hours and 30 business hours and 30 mom hours and 10 sleep hours. And that's kind of how and Jeremy, you could attest to this, that, I'm typically open to kind of taking a chance and investing in something, that might be a bit riskier to kind of set that foundation. And I wanted to kind of work from that place of I have space and I have energy and brain power to put into the business, and I can always, switch gears, add more clients if I need to. But if I can, get the foundation of the base of the business, work on growth and hiring and supporting those therapists and supporting the marketing, that, ultimately that would pay off in the end.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think, Lindsay, working with you, and the biggest thing that stood out to me is, and Wendy, so she used to work for somebody called, or Michael Gerber, and he has this idea called a entrepreneurial seizure, which is like someone's a technician, right? So a therapist, and they say, hey, I've got too many leads to deal with. I'm going to go start a business, but they've not been trained to actually run a business. And where I'd say you differ is I think you're kind of prone to business. Like your mind kind of works that way, and you're not, in a certain sense, you're also not afraid of investing in things to see results. So we always talk about marketing, right? What's the ROI? We're okay with putting money in because we know we can retain a client for X amount of sessions. So that makes it worth it, right? I think the archetype story of most practice owners are that they don't have that background that I think you kind of inherently have, and that want to dig into the data and make decisions based off of it. I've always appreciated that about your perspective.
Thank you. I like that, the seizure. That's a good, I'm familiar with the dynamic, but never given it a name before. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too, when you were describing that you had been encouraged to go into engineering, and just because of the way that you think about things. And so I imagine even having that, kind of relationship to those kind of ideas and systems and structure and the relationships between the two and building would probably have crossed over to your advantage a bit in terms of thinking through from a business context, not just filling up, your day or billable hours and things like that, in terms of leading your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that, as I was thinking about it and as I'll share it, is kind of funny to me in my head is, but unusual for a business owner, I think, is that I really like, the way that math and science is like X plus Y equals Z. And like, you can, like, it's very controlled, what you put in, you get out, and like everything you can kind of trace back to numbers and reasons. Being a therapist is not at all like that. And certainly owning a business is not at all like that, something that can be controlled in that way. But that is kind of, I think, my brain's natural pathway. So yes, I think what you're speaking to about like a potential engineering path is like that, that part of my brain, while it's very tested as an entrepreneur, because there's so much that I can't control as much as I try, Jeremy. I think owning this business and being part of both the like human services side and also the business owner numbers data side is very appealing to me.
Amazing.
So let's talk. So key relationships is kind of the next topic, Lindsay. So for instance, at your revenue size as a therapy practice, you go from being individual contributor to being business owner wearing a ton of hats, and you're kind of scaling up to, what $5 million is usually like where you start to say, hey, I can hand things off and actually have people truly own them without you having to pick up that. So if you could talk through, like, when you decided to go from individual contributor running your own solo practice to bringing on other therapists, were there any key relationships that you came into contact with or formed that really helped you kind of take it to that next stage?
Definitely. And this kind of speaks to what I was sharing about myself and kind of taking risks. Is that my first hire period was a virtual assistant. And before I had a therapist, before I had anyone to manage, I was like, I would rather have an administrative person in place so that once we grow, it's already there, rather than the reverse, which is a very common and understandable practice of, handle it yourself, hire, and then once you have the capacity, then bring in admin support. So she was super part-time, but I do think that really helped to, again, take another piece off of my plate of like billing, answering phone calls, just dealing with logistics that, that I could take off of my plate and invest into like more useful efforts as we were first growing.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the first hires that I made in my role was having a virtual assistant, and they only work 5 to 7 hours a week, but it's like my email, my scheduling, and even today I told a client, they're like, "Hey, can we get 15 minutes on the schedule?" And I said, "Yes, but I don't handle that." And so it was like one of those like hand it off. And I think there's a book by Dan Martell. It's like the first thing you can do to delegate tasks. It's like, what are $25 an hour or less tasks that you can give to somebody else? So it's cool to hear you kind of think through that as your first hire.
Lindsay, I'm super curious. I spent a little time looking, at some social media that you've done, really fun, and, as well as your site. And I think it's super interesting, particularly in the space where a lot of people identify with the industry, right? So like you think more about the industry and what one's doing in terms of, like you said, social services. But at the same time, to make something a business and to differentiate, even in that industry, you have to really think about brand. So, and then also, recruiting in therapists that aren't just there to, hey, I want office space, I want to be part of a group, but actually align towards something. So can you talk a little bit about that journey for you and, what you've had to maybe, how you have to think about it, but also what that means for your team, what that means for how you, look ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something, the marketing and branding has been, such an important part of our journey. I think another risk that I took is I spent a lot of when I opened the Sterling Group, I spent thousands of dollars that didn't necessarily have on for a company to help me with a logo and branding and to do the website creation. Because that it's also another area that therapists are not taught anything about business as part of our training, and certainly not marketing. And it's can be a very uncomfortable thing for therapists who are like, I'm a therapist because I want to help people, it's not about me, and I don't want to make this about me. And there's, even therapists being on social media is controversial these days for different reasons, but it's a deficit in the community of therapy practices, and something that I really wanted to take advantage of, because while DC is saturated with hundreds, thousands of therapists, there's very little direct competitors in terms of other practices that are really focused on what we do and who we work with, and that really show, maybe there are practices, but they're not marketing themselves in the same way. And I also had to think about our clients. Our clients are on social media, they're Googling. Now, obviously, there's been a huge shift towards AI and ChatGPT, but that's where, thinking about like how are our clients looking for therapists, that stuff is really important. So even if we don't, for example, use Instagram or social media as like a lead generator, it's just important to have that touch point for our clients, because they'll learn about us and then they'll look us up on social media and then they'll see, our personality, our vibe. And also they're like, okay, they're too unserious for me, then maybe it's not a fit, and it helps them kind of get to know us a little bit.
That's a great point. And I'll kind of tie it to how Wendy and we always focused on we lived in a financial accounting world, but we very much related on like the energy. Like if you put out good energy into the world, you get it back. And when you said it's not a lead generator for Instagram, my thought before you said vibe was it's a vibe generator. Like you're creating a vibe that makes people relate from a brand awareness standpoint. And I think that really kind of drives, it might be not directly tied to leads, but it definitely drives that as well.
Yeah. I did notice, I have to ask, as you've been growing your team and then also this, very real need. I mean, you really tapped into a need, and that was evident in terms of even where you saw the opportunity. I did note that your therapists tend to be, that you have an all-female team. Was that by accident, design? Is there a reflection of also your clients? Is it just who's into working with, this group, or maybe even just drawn to the vibe, using Jeremy's word, that you're creating?
Jeremy is our first male teammate, officially, although not a therapist. It's a great question, and it's kind of evolving. I would say all of the above that you just shared, in terms of kind of who's looking for this environment, who fits in our culture, which is primarily female identifying therapists. And it's something that's been really interesting, even since I started in my own individual practice, is that our population of male clients is growing. When I started, even, it was maybe 90% of our clients were women, and I would, without looking at the numbers closely, I would say that probably a third of our clients now are men, and maybe even more higher than that if we include like couples clients and group therapy clients. So, that's been like a very exciting shift in terms of the client population. That has opened more like doors and possibilities in terms of who could be on the team. And I think another reality is that when young women and even some young men in young adulthood are looking for a therapist in 2026, in the last few years, there's more comfort speaking to another woman rather than a man in their same age group. Whether it's, just talking about dating, relationships, trauma, sexuality, that's kind of the trend that we had always noticed is, that young adult women who are looking for a peer therapist are therefore looking for a woman often as well. And then for men, they also sometimes request a man, sometimes are flexible, but often, they feel, stereotypes or whatever it is, they feel more comfortable that like a woman can, be more helpful or a safer space to talk through their feelings. So I think there are a lot of, cultural and sociological reasons behind that. But again, our population is shifting, and that, allows our hiring needs to change. But yes, the field is mostly women as well, which is a big factor.
Right.
Okay, so I know we're getting a little bit to time here. I'd love to shift from all right, Lindsay, the business owner, what's on your mind lately? And as I told you before the call, AI is a big thing that we think about because it's happening everywhere. But that we're also just curious, what are business owners and leaders in kind of C-suite positions thinking about right now? Because the world is just ever changing, and AI is an example of that. So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts around that.
Definitely. I think what's on my mind most often, and this, I think, Wendy, was the second part of your question that I didn't quite get to, but is very relevant to this, is, just that balance of culture and relationships in this world that is, becoming more and more digital and robotic, literally, if we're talking about AI.
Yeah.
And, something that I've also found fascinating in the therapy space post-COVID is that our clients do want to come back to the office and to meet in person, which, and thinking about 20 somethings and 30 somethings, I was surprised that those that were in virtual therapy over COVID were like, no, we really want to come back in person. And that new clients, the vast majority are requesting to see their therapist in person, which I was surprised, but amazed and thrilled about. But that, kind of changed. We opened like a big office suite last year to accommodate that. We're already running out of space. But it really, I speak to that one because it's very refreshing that, while you could see a therapist online or, God forbid, use ChatGPT as your therapist, that people are still often, like when it works for them, choosing to come in person and maintain that face-to-face relationship. So, which also then allows us to do that as a team in person, like in this office space that we created. So that's kind of an interesting way that we've interacted with technology the last couple years. And I think speaking to what I mentioned earlier on about kind of like stepping back a little bit and figuring out systems and like the foundation and, accountability and things that, when we grew really quickly and it was kind of just me at the helm of it all, we didn't have those things in place. And we, so now as we work to both like grow the team, build culture, build relationships, but also, implement accountability and consistency across the board, that's, that often creates tension and is kind of an evolving process of figuring out like where that balance is, how to get the right people in the right seats, and how to balance both the culture and the accountability.
I love that. I have to say, when I was looking through just, again, your site and how you're communicating, with your client and the need, there were so many times I wanted to just add the word leader into it. From a business standpoint, or just I've interacted with a lot of 20 somethings and 30 somethings while I've been in business, whether it's just part of our company and I've gotten the pleasure of working with that age and all of the things. And I think, that they are facing today and concerns professionally and personally. Mm-hmm. I thought, gosh, this is really the way to go, because where I often try to bring the support to them in a business context as a manager or just a colleague or being available, is there is a way in which you still are getting paid. And we can talk about mentorship and coaching and all of those things that would be really great to have inside an organization to develop, a leader and a whole person so they can bring their full self to work and have a great environment. All that overlaps, totally. But there is still something about having the support outside of it, because there is something at stake. The truth is, when you're employed, there is concern about what you're going to share. Will that be okay? Will it get out? Mm-hmm. And so the more I was reading about what you offer, I thought it's just genius. Like, we need this, I don't know if you want to start thinking about expanding your brand, but truly, I think that it is just, so needed. And perhaps being a parent of Gen Z and, seeing the transitions, I really hear that. And I'm also interested in the fact that you talked about the tendency that it's been female, but you're seeing now a shift in more male clients coming on that may open it up. But I think it's also a matter of also, maybe things that are being faced. You hear a lot about gambling addiction, like there are many things that are coming up for, and it just tends to be more males that are having some of those issues. And there's so many ways to do it now and things like that. Though I could see like there's just so many areas, to expand upon. And it looked refreshing that you also wanted to do, you're doing more peer group work too.
Yeah. Thank
so
you.
That was more of a commentary, but I was a fan. I just needed to it was great. I was like, wow, I love this.
Yeah. Well,
sounds like
I really appreciate that. Yeah. And I think you're speaking to how we're able to, and how the practice has flexibility to evolve as our clients change and our population grows, and also ourselves. 6 months ago, I was the only mother on the team. Now we have 3 mothers and one who's a mother to be soon. So, now there's kind of a newer interest in, prepartum, prenatal, postpartum interests. I think what you're speaking to about leaders and, those sorts of as our clients and our team matures as well, we're able to kind of open up doors for that sort of thing too. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's poetic how it's come full circle. I mean, my whole wanting to start this podcast is I think business owners are in their head too much and they need to get into the real world, because we kind of create this idea of it's like peeping Tom syndrome, right? You're looking in a window, creating a story of a family you have no interaction with. And the actual percentage that's real is 0.01%, right? And I think that business owners need more of that. And I think what you guys offer, the Sterling Group, is for people to get outside of their heads and talk with somebody that can help them think through things. So that's kind of cool to kind of see that come full circle.
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome.
Do we have time for one more question?
Sure.
So what's ahead? Is there something that you're excited about, over the next 3 to 5 years, or, maybe a bit of a dream of possibility that you're hoping to create or wanting to run towards?
That's a toughie for the last one, but expected. I think, in the very immediate future, obviously I'm just starting to return to work, and I've had some therapists on maternity leave, and we did a lot of work on our structure and our culture, like I mentioned, and kind of getting everyone in the right seats. So I'm really looking forward to the second half of this year to really, one, to stabilize, but also set ourselves up to grow more in the next couple of years, which would look like kind of expanding our office space currently. A big dream of ours as well is to start a master's internship program, which would allow us to kind of be involved in the education of master's level or students at the master's level training to become social workers and counselors. And a vision of ours and one of our core values is accessibility, and having interns as well as the group therapy services that we recently started allow for therapy at a more accessible price point. So that's a big high on the list of ambitions for the practice.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for your time today.